I'm very glad that we can discuss a little bit about it tonight. I think what is very important to mention is that Eliot not only works in this very special post-truth world in order to bring some facts to the fake news that has been recently starting to seriously interfere with mainstream media, but with all the social media timelines. And so it's something that he has started with a team of volunteers and which has grown into an organization now with 20 employees, but has a lot more people volunteering, sending in material. But what you also do is having workshops in order to train people in this special method so that it can find more and more audience and more people who can pick it up and actually do it themselves. I think this is one of these things that gives us hope in a year 2021, where we got so used to interference by former presidents of the United States in the truth of finding mission that presidents should have, but we also use it from a president that sits still in the Kremlin, who's trying to interfere in all sorts of elections and other things in the Western world. So I'm very happy that we can discuss all this. What Eliot and I would really welcome and appreciate is if people who are on Zoom or on Facebook watching us now start this conversation with some questions and answers. If you prepare questions and so we can have a lively debate. Also criticism is welcome, obviously. I think Eliot is really used to it also. So we want to discuss all this with everyone and not only among us. So please prepare questions. On Zoom, those who are with us on Zoom, you can raise a digital hand. If you look at the panel, yellow hand, raise it so that Jutta knows that you want to ask a question, and she will then, when it's your turn, unmute you and you go live with us. People who are on Facebook, you're also very welcome to ask questions. Just type them in and Jutta can then read them to us. Okay, let's kick it off. I was just on Twitter, and what do I find there? Eliot, there's a new investigation that Bellingcat has helped to come to light about a young woman who was one of those who stormed the Capitol on January 6th in Washington, D.C. And she's the one that supposedly has snatched the laptop of Nancy Pelosi. So she denies that. So the investigation now goes not so much about the laptop, because that has to be, I think, first established, but it's about who is this woman. Can you tell us how this came about and how your work in that sense brings these things together?
Yes, so that was actually a rare project that came to us rather than something we discovered ourselves. There were two activists who were working on a project searching for information about these individuals who had been getting up to no good at the January 6th protests. And this one woman had stolen this laptop. She supposedly was going to give it to the Russians, although I think that's according to her ex-husband or ex-boyfriend, so that might not be 100% accurate. But the basically what we had were these videos of her. Basically, it was like a WhatsApp video you'd kind of share if you were a teenager. But in it, she was doing a Nazi salute, saying that Hitler was right and making references to various obscure far-right kind of alt-right figures. And this was shared with us. And the thing is, she was wearing a mask and with sunglasses. So how could we figure out who it was? Well, we found other sources of information where she had filmed other videos in the same room and posted them online without a mask on. So she was clearly identifiable. And then we also searched for her social media and discovered she had a lot of or racist statements, I should say, in her social media history. She had said, especially targeting Jewish people, and also using a lot of language that was very online. I would just say it's the kind of online far right language. And it was an interesting insight that she had come from this kind of online sub community, because really it's not just that, oh, she did a Nazi salute, but it's about the community that she actually came from online, that these people kind of exist as a community. And I think having visibility of that is very important when you're discussing issues around what happened on January 6th, because it's very easy just to see them as one big bunch of Trump supporters when really there's more going on than that.
Well, interestingly, after January 6th, the first thing that was sort of spread on Twitter was also that all this was organized by a left-wing mob, the Antifa. Trump sort of helped spread this, this rumor. But you told me that you watched actually these videos and you came to a different conclusion.
Yes, so we've been reviewing a lot of this footage. Just after the event started on January 6th, we asked people to send us any videos they found from the day's events so we could actually start making an archive, because we had previously been looking into a similar event in the US. There was a kind of far-right related event, the Charlottesville Firelight Torch event, which led to violence and the death of someone in the other side of crowd the following day. And we knew that preserving that video evidence would be really useful for the future, for finding people, for piecing together actually what happened. And we collected around 1,000 videos, and we've been piecing through all those videos, trying to have a very thorough understanding of what happened on the day, so that we could see the moments where police lines were being broken through and the exact timing of moments and when certain acts of violence were performed. What was very interesting for me watching those videos is, yes, it was the Trump supporters who were of all stripes, I would say, who were involved with the violence at different points, but it was a slow escalation. It wasn't just suddenly there were people fighting. There was actually an interesting period early on when the police started using riots, things like stun grenades, for example, and flashbangs, and fire them into the crowd. And that actually seemed to really contribute to the aggression and the buildup in the crowd. So it's when you have all that content, all that video footage you can review, you can find those moments like that and understand what was happening. And it was definitely not Antifa who was responsible for the violence there. It was Trump supporters, but you can see why that happened as it built up. Not saying it was justified, but you can see the anger rising throughout all this footage.
And when you go and you identify then on footage people, how do you go about it? Is it face recognition software, or what do you do?
Well, in this case, we haven't actually done this to identify individuals, because we had a discussion. We're not here to do the FBI's job for them in identifying these people. Kind of one. Two, there's not many of us. And for us, the priority was collecting and archiving the video and understanding it. And whilst we've been doing that, everyone else has kind of been off kind of crowdsourcing who these people are to various levels of success. I mean, there have been kind of this online brigade that has unfortunately identified the wrong people as suspects, and they've had harassment, which is why we don't want to be part of that kind of manhunt in this situation, because when it becomes, the more complex an investigation is, the less people you want working on it. So when there's a really complex investigation like IDing someone and you've got lots of people working on it on the internet, you get loads of kind of groupthink going on. And you have the same situation now that you had with the Boston Marathon bombing Reddit investigation, where this kind of groupthink took hold and they identified the wrong people. So you kind of have to be really kind of aware of how these communities exist online, how they work.
I mean, it's also extremely dangerous, of course, that if you claim to work for establishing truth in a post-truth world, you have to be super, super accurate. If you make mistakes, then you undermine your own credibility.
Yeah, and I think it's because the kind of old sources of authority have kind of, almost betrayed the trust of some people. Things like the invasion of Iraq in 2003. And that includes kind of medical authorities. There's more and more people dissatisfied with healthcare and maybe the way they've been treated by doctors. So they're going out and kind of seeking communities online where they can learn about this kind of alternative world. And this is how we start having conspiracy theories. And unfortunately, the internet has been very good at kind of producing those kind of communities. But I think maybe Bellingcat offers an alternative to that, where we can actually have this evidence-based investigation. And I think that's really core to what we are as Bellingcat. It's evidence-based investigation. We aren't asking people to say, trust us. We're asking them to say, look for yourself, look at the evidence.
If we go back a little bit to your origins, I think it's quite interesting for people to understand where you come from. So you were still working in a kind of bread job that didn't interest you very much in Leicester, where you're from, when you started in your free time to look at videos that were being uploaded during the Arab Spring, especially in Libya. And you got interested in finding out why there was so much stuff being uploaded that actually nobody really verified before, and it was so unclear what actually happened. So how did you start your work then as a one-man volunteer interested person sitting somewhere in England without a word of Arabic, I think also?
It was actually really gradual. I mean, it wasn't like as big a leap, I think, as sometimes people think. It honestly started off just, you know, being on internet forums and being interested in a certain thing, which at that time was the Arab Spring, and having this opportunity to discuss it and be with people who were interested as well. I remember in 2010 when there was the kind of the Battle of Tahrir Square in Cairo, which was a live streamed clash between the police and the protesters that was watched by maybe millions, thousands of people across the world, because it was live streamed on television and on the internet. So there were whole communities of people sat around watching that kind of stuff happen. And I think it was the first time that the kind of digital world was being connected to conflict in that way. And then as this kind of Arab Spring progressed, kind of Libya was where I found my interest. And every day I'd be looking at videos from Libya and feeling frustrated. There wasn't any source in the media that would take those videos, analyze them, and actually use them in their reporting so we could understand it. So I thought, I'm going to kind of do that myself. But it wasn't for any kind of greater goal. It was really just about discussing stuff on the internet and really wanting to know what something was for my own interest, not because I was trying to serve an audience. And then I decided to start, purely as a hobby, a blog. So I could write down some of this stuff I was discussing on the internet. And that was when the conflict in Syria was kind of taking off. And I was still doing a full-time job, kind of my old admin work, but I just doing this in my spare time. And just over time, I started finding things like cluster bombs, the first video of cluster bombs being used in Syria, the first barrel bomb videos, and the escalation of the conflict through these videos. And in 2013, I discovered there were new weapons appearing in the conflict, because I'd been studying the weapons and kind of figuring out what they were and kind of posting about that. And they turned out to be weapons from the former Yugoslavia. And that's when I went to the New York Times with the story, and they discovered it was actually part of a secret Saudi smuggling network to the rebels in Syria. And we had discovered this because I'd been watching YouTube videos for the last year of every weapon in Syria. And I just specialized in that one thing that no one else had tried to do. Mm. And through that, I just, having that kind of evidence, but also focusing so much on that one particular thing, gave me an advantage no one else really had, because no one else was looking at these sources. And that really, I think, brought to the world's attention, or at least a bit of the world's attention, why open source investigation was so valuable.
I mean, one of the most fascinating chapters in the book is how you describe how you started the investigation, and you were not the only one. I mean, many people sort of tried to dig into this when President Assad of Syria used chemical weapons against his own population, and then tried to say that it was the rebels themselves who put themselves on the floor and pretended to have foam in front of their mouths. And so you went into this. I mean, for me, it is, even if you say that you became a weapons expert, but I mean, how do you go about such an investigation? If you sit in England, how do you trust also people who bring you material from the ground? I mean, how does this whole investigative operation works?
So I had noticed during, so every day I would be looking at the videos from Syria that were kind of popping up on social media. It wasn't very systemized, it was kind of luck-based almost. And there was an event called the Hula Massacre, where there was a village that was attacked and civilians killed. And it was the first kind of really big, horrible moment in Syria, one that was like, oh my, you just couldn't believe what had happened, because there were children killed, videos coming from the ground. It was the first kind of big massacre, I guess, of that conflict. And that night I stayed up and did a kind of live blog of all the stuff that was being shared. So lots of people were coming to my page to read what was kind of going on with that stuff. And the thing I learned there is there were certain YouTube videos, YouTube channels that uploaded YouTube videos for certain areas. It was like the local media center or the local armed group would have their own, and this was only rebel-held areas, but also in a very limited way, clustered around certain locations because there was limited internet access. So you either had to have a satellite phone or smuggle USB sticks out to get stuff online. So it was kind of strangely clustered, not scattered. So when I found those YouTube channels, I just started watching them every single day. And I'd be going, I couldn't watch every one because there were maybe 400 new videos a day. And eventually I got to about 1,000 channels that I was scrolling through on YouTube every day. And I would click on a channel, see if there's like anything interesting in it. Fortunately, YouTube introduced the subscription system where you could actually just see the latest videos appear in the channels you subscribe to, because it was driving me mad. I would literally go through every day, clicking every 1,000 kind of channels to look at every, yeah. But you would find just amazing stuff in there that was unique. Like doing that, I found the first video of cluster bombs. I was probably one of the first 20 people to see that video. I was able to write up an article, and this is when I was like nobody, and Human Rights Watch picked it up and did a piece on it. And that was kind of my first experience of kind of really connecting to this wider community in a way where my evidence, my analysis of the evidence had been reported on by someone else who was not the media. It was a human rights organization. So I thought this is probably quite serious business.
Yeah.
So, but that is kind of, it was always a very gradual process. It was just, I was never, when I started out, my early investigations were literally, here's some videos of stuff from Syria. This is what I think it is. It's like, oh, I think that's a tank with like a B-21 tank or something like that. It's not an actual tank. People will be angry with that in the arms community. I said that, but you have to be really precise about your arms recognition, because I didn't want to get it wrong. So I became obsessed down to like the tiniest bolt of a machine gun I might see, or a surface-to-air missile launcher. I wanted to say something, and I wanted to be right. And I went around looking for information on Soviet weaponry, because that's what Assad was using. And there's loads of it online. There's loads of communities who are like would share literally the bolts down to the serial numbers. So if you had a serial number on a piece of weaponry, you could search these kind of Russian web forums and it would come up with what the weapon was. So even with the smallest fragments of weapons, you could actually ID stuff. And that's what I did that no one else bothered to do, probably because I was a bit obsessive, but it seemed to work. People started really noticing.
It can be obviously quite a productive obsession that you developed there. When you moved on to the Ukrainian conflict, this is probably an investigation that brought you to a large audience. When you and your volunteers or co-workers proved that the missile that brought down the Malaysian airplane MH17 over eastern Ukraine was not shot there by rebels or other mysterious forces, but was brought in by the Russian Federation to be used by the Russian sympathizing rebels.
I think the launch of Bellingcat marks a turn in the way I was doing investigations as well, because back at the August 21st, 2013 Saturn attacks in Damascus was the first big complex investigation I did. It wasn't just about one or two videos, it was about hundreds of videos. And this was a chemical attack. And that's why I kind of learned that kind of next level of investigating, where you combine all these different sources to actually start telling a story rather than just pointing, here's a thing that's interesting. Even when I was looking at the arms, it was basically, here's a thing that's interesting. But that did teach me to look for patterns in videos where you had lots of people using these new weapons. So when it came to launching Bellingcat, I was writing guides and case studies about how to do that. I was trying to already build an audience who could also do investigations, because I saw the value in collaborating like that. So when it came to MH17, Bellingcat had been launched 3 days earlier, and this just kind of was a massive catalyst, not just for kind of Bellingcat, but the community around it. The community of just normal people online who were just engaged in this conflict, and people from human rights organizations, journalists, and those kinds of things. But that meant that us kind of nerds at home on our desktops and kind of looking at pictures and satellite images and figuring out where the missile launcher was valuable to the journalists we were connected to, who just were reading Bellingcat, but would follow up what we were discovering online. So there started being this kind of new kind of informal connection between what we were doing and what they were doing. Because our research was evidence-based, it led to something, because we were pointing them to clues on the ground, and they built trust in us because of how reliable we became. So that's kind of where we went with the investigation with MH17, and it just developed into the community increasingly tight-knit. There were 5 or 6 of us, and we became the Bellingcat investigation team as a kind of just a Slack channel, basically, where we could work together. It wasn't like meant to be like a superhero name or anything like that. And we just started working, and we just found more and more information. It was like one thing after another. MH17 led us to investigations on Russia's involvement in the conflict beyond MH17. And then Russia started bombing Syria. And that kind of brought me back to where I kind of started. And the kind of 2 open source communities focused on MH17 and Syria kind of really came together.
But your research and your findings also have now been already part of the court cases that came out of the downing of the MH17. How does that work? I mean, do you have to have any legal credibility so that these investigation results can be admitted to courtrooms?
Yes, so we're doing a lot of work now to look at how this kind of stuff can be used as evidence, because with MH17, we were approached by some of these cases, like in the European Court of Human Rights, where they were really wanted to look at the open source evidence. The problem was, when we were doing these investigations, we were just amateurs kind of figuring out how this stuff worked, and we didn't even think about it as evidence. So we had a very painful experience of going back to our old work, looking for broken links, stuff that could be polished up and presented more for a court. It was a nightmare. It was like having to rewrite your entire life's work in a different language. It was just not fun to do. And when we actually did it, we realized that we really needed a system that would allow us to investigate incidents in a kind of methodology that was repeatable, that was trainable, and also something that could be completely transparent. So if it came to court, we could defend what we were doing and how we were using evidence. And we've actually just had a mock trial on examples of Saudi airstrikes in Yemen, where we had a mock trial with a judge from the ICC. And myself and one of my colleagues were given a grilling on one of the investigations that we did as part of this process. And the whole point of doing it is trying to improve how these sorts of systems work, because we want to put something together that we can actually give to other organizations that they can use in their own work, and you know, spread this and make it, you know, something that is usable for the justice and accountability community.
What happened after the Ukrainian investigation, when you moved on to the new tool of FSB agents trying to poison critics or former agents of their own service, like Sergej Skripal or Alexej Navalny? Was this the first time that you then started not only to use open source material that you can easily find, or not easily, but you can find it on the internet? Because I remember when Skripal was poisoned, and then we came up with the first ideas, and then suddenly Bellingcat published the names and the real names of the Russian agents, the two people who supposedly went on holidays to see the beautiful cathedral in Salisbury, but strangely never went by there. And we learned all these details about these men, but we also learned their real names. And I was thinking, that's odd, because if I want to know the real names of people who run around and use different passport names, I cannot find it. So how does that work? How is this still open source?
So this actually really started in 2018 with the poisoning of the Skripals. And one of my colleagues, Christo Govers, has spent a lot of time gathering leaked Russian databases. It's just like a hobby of his, because he likes looking into GRE officers, and he kind of dabbled in it for a bit. But when the Skripal poisoning happened, there was some information published about them, not by the UK government, because that wasn't really that useful for what we tried to do, but a Russian news website got the flight manifest of the flight they were on. And this included their full names, date of birth, and passport numbers. And their passport numbers are only a few numbers apart. And that was very suspicious, because that is not something you normally see. So we started looking into this, and Christo, first of all, looked for them on his databases, from things of like house registration, car registrations, all kinds of things like that. And he looked them up on one database, I believe from 2013, and found the two names and the two people. And then he looked them up on the one from a year earlier. So that had no one on it with those names, which showed that these people were created between 2012, 2013, and they definitely looked more than 5 years old. So they were definitely existed before then. So we started looking into this, and we realized they actually used a pattern to fake their names, because a few years earlier, there'd been an attempted coup in Montenegro by the Russian Foreign Intelligence Services. And one of the people who were arrested had an ID that had there were two different identity documents for the same person. So a real ID and a fake ID. And they had similarities, the same first name, the same date of birth, and the same place of birth. And that was the pattern they were using to fake their identities. And we found someone else who were using leaked documents. We were eventually able to identify as the GRU officer who was the guy who was in the Skripal poisoning. And we had to there make a decision because they weren't posting on Facebook and they weren't using Twitter because they were spies. But we knew there was this data market in Russia. In Russia, because it's so corrupt and it's a police state, they have lots of information that people are just leaking absolutely everywhere, selling on these online data kind of markets. And it's been going on for years. I read a Financial Times article where 10 years ago, there was a market in Russia, just an ordinary market, and they were just openly selling DVDs with car registration databases on. So we had that source, which was, you know, it was just out there. So it was ethically not so bad, we thought. But then the other source was what was in the live system. And you got that by buying that from data brokers who knew people who would get this information, like passport registration forms or complete phone records. This is out in the open. This isn't like hidden away on the dark web and you need all kinds of Tors and onions and things to connect to it. You just need to go on a Russian internet forum through Google and find some guy who knows a guy. And we used that. And through that, we managed not only to discover the real identities of the Skripal poisoning, we connected them to another poisoning in Bulgaria in 2015 of an arms dealer. We connected them to a chemical weapons program in Russia that manufactures Novichok and was unknown to the world previously. We then connected that to the poisoners involved with the Navalny poisoners, because when he was poisoned, we just checked their phone records, which are easily available. And they'd been calling up these FSB team members. We just pieced it all together, and then we had the entire story. And Navalny called up his own poisoner based off that information and tricked him into giving a 50-minute confession.
I mean, this is probably the most spectacular story for people watching it who don't know anything, but the face of Christo Grozev, your Bellingcat co-worker, and also Maria Pevchik, who worked on this with the team of Navalny, how they're sitting there, and when Navalny gets this guy to tell him the story, I mean, it is just completely, it's just really hard also to believe it, because the story is almost too good to be true. I mean, how do you counter your critics then when they say, like, okay, either you have been given this information by the CIA or the whole thing is completely staged? I mean, how can the FSB be so stupid to have people working with them who just pick up the phone when it rings and believe Navalny lying that he's superior, and don't check it, don't ask, don't whatever, and just tell him the whole story? I mean, it sounds really so stupid that I can hardly believe it.
Yeah, I mean, we couldn't believe it either. It was like the world's most successful prank call, I think. It was, I just couldn't believe it when he told me, because I was hearing this through Signal. So I was getting a text message saying, you won't believe it, Navalny just pulled up his poisoner. And I was like, we were like just blown away by it. And we didn't even see the video until about a day before it was released, because we were so busy getting it ready. We didn't even have time to share a version of it with each other. So yeah, that was a pretty exciting week for us. But we knew we had it when Putin was going to give his press conference, and we purposely held on to it before he could give a comment on what was happening, knowing that he would probably give a reaction, and then we could play off that the next week. What we didn't think is he would actually basically say that he was being followed by the FSB, but they would have successfully poisoned him if they were trying to poison him. And then, of course, 2 days later on Monday, we have the guy saying, oh, yeah, this is exactly how we tried to poison him. We were following him, giving all the operational details. And we couldn't really ask for a better reaction from him, apart from saying, yes, we did it. So we were really pleased with that result, and it had a really big impact as a result.
Well, it certainly did. But a lot of people are completely convinced that you are paid by a Western security service, because it just seems that a lot of your work, unlike WikiLeaks, which always came up with things that were bad for the Democrats in America and also the Republicans in America, but basically it went against America, and a lot of your research goes against Russia. Is this a sign that you're an anti-Russian agent?
Well, the reason, I mean, actually, when we published the Navalny research, what we did is we actually wrote a lengthy post explaining how we did it, because we try and be open with our methodology. And with this, because it wasn't pure open source, we weren't really able to point people directly. It wasn't like we could point to a YouTube video. But with this one, we could tell them how we actually got the data, because it wasn't like a super secret. It wasn't hard to figure out. So we thought, okay, we went to these data markets. We asked for the telephone records that's this specific number. It came back, and in that database of 10,000 lines, one of them was the phone number of a poisoning team member. And we have 2 other databases to confirm that. This is like really, this isn't just like saying, hey, can we have the FSB data, please, Mr. Data Broker? And the data broker with a fake mustache and a CIA name badge. He goes, yeah, sure, buddy. It's really it's like there's no way you could fake it, because we're asking like 3 different sources. And then what happened, because we explained that in our post, Russian news agencies went out and brought the same data and said, oh yeah, it's here, you can get it, and we've just found what Bellingcat has. And we did that on purpose because we knew that's as transparent as we could be. So you know, that's kind of why we can get this information. But also you know, on the second question about just kind of the intelligence stuff, if you look at my background, where I come from, what intelligence agency in the world would look at me and think, oh, we need to use the guy who's got really terrible anxiety and plays way too much World of Warcraft? That'll change the world, won't it? I mean, it's a long game and it's impressive work if they have, but it's a very different story. And, you know, it's, yeah, buy my book and you can find out more.
This is exactly why we recommend to everyone to read Digital Warriors, Digitale Jäger. I think we're ready to hear some questions. And of course, I can sort of continue giving you my hard questions, but let's see what viewers want to ask. Jutta, can you direct someone to us?
Yes, there is already one question typed. I will just read it to you. It's with the surge of democratization of technology to produce deep fakes relatively easily and inexpensively. How do you think your work will change in the next couple of years?
I mean, when it comes to deep fakes, the thing with deep fakes is, as evidence, they're rubbish, because they're easily debunked. If you have to create something like someone giving a speech that's fake, you can find the original footage of the speech and check it, and it's like, you know, done, it's fake. So unless they're very sophisticated, they're not much of a threat, and maybe they will get more sophisticated. But the problem is they get spread so quickly. Now, I feel there's going to be almost an arms race between the companies creating the deepfake technology and the companies creating deepfake detection technology, which is already out there to a certain extent. But if that can then get automated and made part of social media, or just plugins you could use in a browser, that could actually be, you know, I think that's the real only solution we can have, because you can't ban a technology like that. You can't just say, no, you can't use this technology anymore. It's going to be used. So that's really the only way forward with that. So I see the future now. In my hopeful future, what I would like to be doing is building networks of people doing the kind of investigative work that we do at all kinds of levels of society aimed at different topics, because I think it's a way to really actually engage with the world in a way that's positive, when often online there's so many negative ways of engaging in the world. And if we live in a society where, if you're feeling distrustful of the media or another source of authority like politicians or doctors, and the only place you can go online is to find an alternative view on that are the conspiracy theorists, we can't be surprised when everyone becomes conspiracy theorists when they have some doubts. And there's a lot of doubts in these institutions. So this is why I think open source investigation is so useful. I think what I've shown is you can be an ordinary person and have a real impact. I mean, I didn't start this as any kind of expert in anything. I just taught myself all this different stuff. And if I can do that and be here now doing what I'm doing, I think anyone can. I'm not doing anything miraculous. It's not as hard as it might look sometimes. I mean, sometimes it's not as easy as it looks either, but it's a different story. But we can build a community that actually engages with information in a much better way. And what I'd like to do with Bellingcat is actually go out and start training, do kind of virtual newsrooms in secondary schools in the UK and other countries, showing kind of 16, 17, 18-year-olds, you know, how to do this kind of investigation but focused on the local area where they live. So they can feel that they're part of the community and connect them to a kind of evidence-based investigation network that can actually help them have impact and give them a new way of actually expressing themselves that they might not have realized they had an option of doing.
Well, I actually sort of tried to convince my 16-year-old son to come on this talk and listen to you. But he sort of, because it's me maybe, but he thought he would continue playing a computer game instead.
So that's the other thing you have to fight against, disinformation in computer games.
Yeah, exactly. This is one of these subjects. Okay, there's another question here by Armin Eugel. I can read it if you're not against it, Jutta. You investigate some of the most dangerous actors in the world. Is it an issue for you and your colleagues being observed?
Well, I mean, it's obvious that we've got the attention of, I think, the Russians. That's for sure. I mean, it's been quite a journey with the Russians. They feel like old friends or maybe old enemies, because it started in 2015 where the pro-Russian media kind of started writing negative articles about us, trying to imply we're either idiots or the CIA and those kind of things. And with our investigations into MH17, eventually even the Russian state started criticizing us. We had the foreign ministry spokesperson criticizing us in her weekly briefings more than once. We had, even go up to kind of Sergej Lavrov's position, people talking about Bellingcat. And I mean, that was part of the fun. I mean, just seeing that reaction from them. And, we were volunteers. We were just kind of doing this for fun. But obviously, it's got increasingly serious. I mean, now we are volunteers exposing assassins and stuff like that. So I've been contacted by the UK police about my own safety, and they check in on me. And I think they've got notes. Like, if you look at my address on their police computers, you get notes about, like, don't touch door handles and stuff like that. So that's kind of a weird experience. But maybe because we've been locked down for so long, I feel safer than I should. But, it's okay for the moment. But if I'm going to hotels, it's like I don't eat the food because I don't know who's bringing food to my door anymore. And I've got to have that extra level of paranoia, I think, especially when you consider what happened to Navalny in his own hotel room. So you have to have that kind of extra level of paranoia. It just means I have to eat sandwiches from a supermarket, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but still, that's life.
Well, but we know since Navalny that even your underpants might not be safe now.
Yeah, I need to carry them about in my laptop bag now when I get full.
But Armin Eugel actually is asking this question here also, what kind of precautions you take, because I saw, for example, on an excellent documentary that was on Arte by a Dutch documentary maker called Hans Paul. You were still you had him in your kitchen with your wife and your children, showing at least the interior of your apartment. I mean, would you still do that nowadays when you know that a lot of people might want to figure out where you live?
Well, I knew I was moving house after that was being filmed, so if they do try and find me on there, they'll be looking at the wrong house. So that's not too much of a problem with that one. But the thing is, we do have a kind of trust network. We know a lot of people now. One thing, with Bellingcat, we try and actually have a high profile because we see that as our only protection against assassination and murder, basically. Because, we're hoping we'll be important enough that, it makes us a harder target. But, I mean, that is a hope rather than, something we actually know. So, but then your only choice is just to do what you want to do. Just keep on investigating it. Because maybe it'll get to the point where actually some people look at it and say, actually, that's probably a bad thing that Russia's assassinating people with nerve agents, and do more than just expel diplomats or do some limited sanctions no one cares about. Because for Russia, that's part of the price. And if we expose all this stuff, we've exposed, I think now we're up to our fifth or sixth assassination using nerve agent we've exposed by Russia, and we have 4 more in the bag that we're going to be publishing about. If Russia thinks it can get away with that when everyone knows about it and only get a few sanctions, what's going to stop them doing it? Because they're just going to keep on doing it and doing it and doing it. There needs to be a reaction to this, and we'd really appreciate one because we feel a lot safer if there was. That's
true. The more people come on open source investigations and help you, the more people cannot just maintain some kind of fake news and think that nobody cares, which is definitely. I hope the future. We have here Alexander Shep, or Sepp, depending if it's Hungarian or Polish, asking, or Austrian, coming from one of these countries like me. I have 3 Zs in my family name I have to add here. And my family name is Polish. He says, you surely have a kind of a sophisticated system to archive web information you find before it goes offline again. Specifically, how do you archive, for example, YouTube videos?
So this is something we've been developing because as there's been an increasing interest in using open source evidence in justice and accountability, there's a need for archiving. And groups like Bellingcat are going to be like the first line of response when these videos are published online, because there's currently no big human rights or justice and accountability community really that is collecting this kind of content systematically. It's kind of being left to the amateurs to do it. So we've had to rise to the occasion. And the way we've done that is, first of all, starting to develop a new process for investigation where we can collect evidence using a system that not only archives videos, but in fact archives all our web searches, everything we're doing. If we visit a page, it tracks it, downloads the entire content of the page, and logs it. So that if it comes to sharing stuff in court, we can not only show the evidence we're using, but the journey we took to get there. So we can even show the defense we did consider all the different facts. So building a system that is that useful, and that's where we've been having this recent mock trial on Saudi airstrikes in Yemen, where we had this judge from the ICC, and we went through the evidence with them, which was a unique experience. But this is kind of what we're trying to do now, to develop these systems. And we're working with groups like, for example, the Syrian archive, and they're calling Mnemonic Labs now because they also have Yemen archives and other archives.
What's the name exactly?
It's Mnemonic Labs, formerly the Syrian archive, but they have an archive of literally over 1 million YouTube videos and other content from Syria. And that needs to be organized and stored. So something we're trying to do as well is answer that problem. We're going to build a volunteer section where part of the information that people will volunteer to verify and geolocate are these videos from Syria in batches. So we can actually enrich that data set and make it useful for the kinds of justice and accountability organizations, researchers who in the future want to use this information, because otherwise it's an unsearchable mess. But even within that, they've been developing projects that allow cluster munitions, for example, to be scanned and searched for in YouTube videos. So if you're looking for a type of cluster munition, you type it in, and this machine learning algorithm has already searched for every single cluster bomb in 1 million videos, and it's just indexed them because they scan 3D models of cluster bombs and train the AIs to actually recognize them in videos. It's really incredible technology, but I think that's just the start for what's going to be possible with this kind of footage and these massive archives. And it could make them incredibly useful data for the future. 1 million videos of the conflict in Syria, which I'm sure would be very valuable to the Syrian people in the future, if not the justice and accountability community.
Yeah. But don't we need then some kind of Wikipedia for videos, sort of that somebody has to edit also what is what and how to do it and how to exit it, the whole... So
one of the technologies that's also being worked on is an indexing system. It's been developed by Benetech, and the idea is you can kind of point out a data set of videos, and it will assign each video a unique hash, basically a digital description of what's in it, a kind of brief note of what's in it. And they're all unique, unless the video is either the same or quite similar to the other video. And this means it can actually search for videos that are very similar to each other. And this means we can actually start using that to map out whole networks of these millions and millions of videos. But it is a massive task. It's unbelievably huge. And we're trying to do this. And unfortunately, wars keep on happening. And that kind of evidence is still being produced. I mean, I was looking at footage from Eritrea, Ethiopia, Sudan, just in the last 48 hours. Everything that is the kind of material that should be archived, but it isn't being archived. And it means that information will be lost. And the internet isn't forever. It's temporary. And until we understand that as kind of investigators, we can't really address the problems that we face, which is just stuff disappears. So that kind of work is a really high priority for us at Bellingcat now.
We have, and I'm very happy to report that, a question from a woman, because it seems that this whole Bellingcat thing is so male dominated. So here is Sabrina Kaszowitz, and she's asking how much of your daily info comes from human resources, or is the majority of your research based on databases, data available from open or closed sources?
The funny, we do actually have quite a few women at Bellingcat, but they're,
yes.
Oh yeah, we do. So I just want to bust that myth. I mean, we're not all nerds, I have to say. There's some nice people in there as well. Human resources. No, well, in a sense we do, because it's the social media of people on the ground. They become our kind of lens into what's happening. And sure, they have their own biases, but we aren't asking for their opinion. We're asking for what their digital eye is showing us in that moment. So we can try and witness the event from multiple angles. So yeah, and in the sense that's our human resources, but also there's the network of people around Bellingcat who are our Twitter followers, and we might have say, what is this object? And we'll have 50 people reply with the right object and 200 with the wrong. But it brings us a bit closer to the question we're looking for. And we've used that at great success with the Europol Trace and Object Stop Child Abuse campaign, where Europol were asking people to identify objects in this abuse imagery that they cut out, I should say. So like a handbag or a bottle of soap, or just random items. And they had asked the public to identify them, but they had like 2,000 Twitter followers. And I saw that and I thought, well, let's amplify that. And we shared it with our larger amount of followers. And loads of people started replying and saying, oh, I know what that is. I know what that is. A Reddit community started up around it. And that was kind of the human resources I kind of think about when, in a sense, we're using it. It's not that we're proactively engaging with them. They're just putting it online. It's kind of like almost a passive human resource that we can kind of draw on when we need to.
Very interesting. We have a raised hand of Georg Krauchenberg. Jutta, would you put him straight into our conversation?
I will. There are two raised hands. I will start with Georg. You should be able to talk now.
I think he's still muted, isn't he? Hold on.
Oh, yeah. And now is it fine?
Hello.
Great. Thank you. Hello. Thank you very much for this most fascinating explanations. I just wonder if your activities are not especially valuable, given the fact that international organizations such as OSCE and so on, they are so limited in their possibilities to look into matters. And on the other hand, when you have professional secret services of other countries, when they come up with some evidence, either they may not put it into public, or it's used like country against country. But from your side, it's like a more or less neutral place where you are coming up with the evidence. And as long as it can be proven, it's great. Thank you very much.
I think the internet has kind of liberated a certain kind of information that's extremely useful. It's not satellite imagery. It's not kind of spies on the ground. It's something that we're all sharing online. And that is, if you think of it in terms of intelligence, it's probably the greatest intelligence gathering tool ever created, because people are sharing absolutely everything about their lives. Enough information to actually make them, liable for criminal acts, and evidencing that. We saw this on January 6th, lots of people doing criminal acts, and people are sharing this online, and it's unique. It's something that's new. It hasn't happened before in human history. And I think because I was lucky enough to be one of the first people to kind of stumble accidentally into that, it kind of started developing this whole open source investigation movement. And it means we don't have to rely on the traditional sources of power now to give us the answers. We can find the answers for ourselves, and in a way that we've never been able to do before, both in big and small. And I think that's an incredible opportunity, but I think, we have to be able to take it. And until we recognize it for what it is, and I think people kind of don't really do that, then I don't really think we can do much more. But the problem is the people who don't recognize it are these big organizations like the OSCE. They're moving into it more and more. One thing that was quite interesting with Ukraine is they started sharing more footage with coordinates on and details like that, which for the open source community is very polite, because so much footage gets shared online of gun cameras that could be useful, but there's not coordinates on them. So when someone is nice enough like the OSCE to recognize that need from the open source community, it gives us hope that things might change. And for us, I mean, if Ukraine had shot down MH17, we'd reported it in exactly the same way, done the same investigations. It's not about picking a side, but looking at the evidence and seeing what the truth is. So, and I think that's what motivates most of us. We want to know what happened. We don't want to make a political point, really, in the sense that that overrides what we want to know. I mean, if we look into something and it goes against what we think happened, which sometimes does happen, that's fine. We're happy to publish that. We're happy to write about that because it's the truth. And as soon as you start going away from that and thinking about what will make me money or what will make me friends, then, I can't see the point of doing it. I mean, I'm not here to, lie to myself, is basically what I'm saying.
Interestingly, because you just said, like, I'm not here to make money, but you do a lot of work now that you don't charge for, because we can all profit from your research. Also, as classical media, we can sort of use what you came up with in our reporting. How does that work? I mean, is this necessary for you in order to have a credibility, not as profiteur of these things, but how are you financing your organization?
So I always, when I started doing this, was part of a community who shared information with me. They told me stuff about weapons and arms and Syria, and we shared information. And we didn't put a price on that information because we all wanted to know what the truth was behind something. Because if we put a price on it, it was a price we were paying ourselves, not something we could possibly gain from. So it was never really a thought that we would ask money for something. It's not the greatest business model, but it's very good for building a community that's based off trust and based off examining evidence. Because what you're doing by kind of sharing in that way is you're giving people access to the one thing they want, more evidence. And that builds a community that really is built on trust. So, I mean, that is really kind of core to a lot of what Bellingcat is, build that community that's built on trust. And that's why we try and build it and spread it. And doing that, speaking about finance, I mean, it's not cheap, but I started Bellingcat with a Kickstarter campaign that raised £60,000, not £10 million or anything like that. I started with enough for myself and the website, and we built a community around that step by step. And that allowed not only Bellingcat to grow, but the open source community to grow, and open source as a way of investigating to grow. So, we have kind of doubled in size every year, but I mean, currently we get about 30% of our income from workshops, about 60% from grants for various foundations, and 10 from kind of small donations. And we have a very diverse source of funding, so we can be as independent as possible.
Everyone can also help by buying the book.
It's true.
We had the second raised hand. Jutta, where did it go?
No,
The
second raised hand disappeared, but there is another question in the chat by Ingrid. I will read it to you. With such an enormous amount of information being put online, it must be a challenge to check and verify videos, etc. Could you talk a bit more about how you go about doing this?
Well, in one sense, because there's so much information online, it's actually useful for us, because it's not like there's many events that happen where there's lots and lots and lots of video footage. The January 6th protests in Washington and the violence, that's probably unique in how many videos came from an event like that, where there was something to monitor and track. Usually it's a bombing in Syria or something like that, where there's just, a handful of these videos. So the more data that's being put online isn't such an issue. But I mean, it doesn't really hide stuff, because there really is so little when you do this, and just more stuff just gives you more evidence to confirm what you're trying to do. So it's never bad to have more stuff. And that's kind of really core to, understanding open source investigation. It's not about all the information. It's about specific pieces of information that you're searching for. So don't think about the haystack, think about the needles that you're searching for inside it.
Here, Jutta, can you read to us Sophie? She's also a woman, and she wants to work with you, Eliot.
Yes, of course I will. Sophie says, hi, I'm a physicist and a woman. I found this talk and Eliot's work extremely interesting. If Bellingcat needs help, I would be happy to do something. I'm a machine learning and data scientist as well. Anyway, thanks a lot for the work you're doing and for this conference.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to hear more about that. I mean, our email, if anyone wants to contact us, is contact@bellingcat.com. So if you want any questions answered afterwards, or want to discuss our work, I'm more than happy to answer your questions.
Contact@belling.com for everyone who wants to get in contact and see. Also about the workshops. I mean, how many workshops do I, for example, as a 53-year-old woman, have to take in order to understand anything about open source investigation? I'm not a digital native. I'm just trying to understand something.
Yeah, we offer a lot of workshops, really aimed at a range of skill levels, but ultimately, it's quite straightforward to do this stuff. If you've ever looked up a place on Google Maps and switched to satellite imagery, I mean, that's a skill that's used in open source investigation. It's knowing how to use these tools, going to Street View. And then you give someone a mission with those tools. You say, find that photograph. Where was that photograph taken? So now you have a reason to use this tool in a slightly different way, but it's not that different. You're still like scrolling this thing around and looking at satellite imagery and scratching your head, but you're scratching your head with a purpose now. So we do that, and we do it with different tools, and then we start combining those tools in different hands-on case studies. So you have a lot of chance to actually put into practice what you're learning during the workshops. And I've trained, personally, hundreds and hundreds of people in workshops. We've trained probably thousands at Bellingcat, and we've never had people who got worse when they've been coming to our workshops. So people always learn something and gain skills, and even the basic skills, I think, will open things up for you a lot.
Before, I have so many questions still for you, and we have only 2 more minutes left. Jutta, do we have people on Facebook who have urgent questions?
No, there are no questions, just people saying thank you for your talk.
Oh, that's always very nice. But then let me ask you one more question.
Sorry, there's one hand raised.
Okay.
It's Gerhard.
And I'm unmuted right now, is that
yes.
right? Okay, hi, and thanks again for this wonderful talk. Since you were mentioning getting younger generations in, will there be a Bellingcat board game at some point in time, maybe? Or, how about gamification of this process and getting youngsters into the process by, just talking to them on their level, maybe?
I think this certainly is. We're actually moving into kind of more creative areas of production. So we're starting off with hopefully what will soon be a documentary series on the Russian assassination stuff. We're in kind of the early days of doing that. I'm very keen to do a documentary on the use of Syrian chemical weapons. But within that, we're looking at interesting ways to engage with audiences using that kind of information. I mean, I've had people from kind of gaming companies kind of offhand, that I've met at an event saying, oh, this would make a good game, but it's never kind of got to that point yet. But with our increasing profile, you never know, it might happen. So hopefully there'll be a Bellingcat video game coming to you soon.
Yeah, I think this is a very good initiative that we should take from this talk. Speak to all of our friends, sons, daughters, and whoever works in gaming, developing video companies, because that could be a success story. Find your murderer, or telephone your murderer in different twists, and all this could be good. It is 19 hours in London. It's 8 o'clock in Vienna. Eliot, I want to thank you really very, very much for coming on to this talk. Here is the book one more time. This is the German version that was published today by Libya, Digitale Jäger. The original is called Bellingcat, and you can get it in a bookshop of your trust around the corner. And I wish you good luck, Eliot. Do not touch your door handles. Be very careful with the underpants. And I hope to see you very soon. And I hope we can all go out of lockdown and see the next time we meet, see us in Vienna in Bruno Kreisky Forum for International Dialogue, who so kindly hosted us all tonight. So thank you to all. Thank you to all the ones who asked questions. And thank you to all the ones who listened in on Facebook or on Zoom Live. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.